Thank you very much, Mr. Getachew Reda, to be in our guests in the Horn of Africa Center. The Horn of Africa Center is aimed at, working hard on how, mostly, there are three main areas we cover. One is the component of, conflict management. And second is the question of national, dialogue, how we can create it among Ethiopians. And also at the end, what kind of, we need in order to have a good governance. As you know, Mr. Getachew, the conflict that has been going on in Ethiopia between the federal government and the Tigray, the TDF, for more than a year, has exposed many to severe famine, disease, malnutrition, and loss of life, and also has caused immense damage to social infrastructure. Hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes and compelled to live in a very dangerous and difficult situation. We invite you today to unpack, and to give us, to elucidate or shed light on this issue. My first question to you, Mr. Getachew, is, according to the federal government, the pretext for waging a war on Tigray was an attack on the federal army, Northern Command by the Tigrayan force on 3rd November 2020. However, military and political development prior to the war indicate that the invasion of Tigray was planned well in advance. Could you please talk about that, how this savage war has started?
Well, as you have rightly pointed out, thank you. By the way, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure for me to appear and say a couple of things, share a few words with my Somali brothers.
Thank you.
And sisters, of course. Hafsa, you will mind. The whole question of how the conflict started would explain at length why we are as a nation, Ethiopia is suffering. It's a question of whether there is willingness on the part of the center in Addis Ababa to tolerate diversity, to accommodate diversity, be it religious, national, ethnic, or demographic diversity. Of course, diversity on the basis of political views. People coming from all sorts of political persuasions can live together as long as there is readiness and willingness on the part of the political elites to come together and deal with issues, and we could work on common agendas while at the same time expressing our differences on issues we feel strongly about. So at the heart of the crisis in Tigray is the unwillingness on the part of Abiy's government and his cohorts to accommodate diversity, the way the constitution of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia had envisaged. The previous 27 years have had their fair share of problems when it comes to the full exercise of federalism, the full exercise of the full accommodation of diversity. But at least there was a constitutional guarantee that people, ethnic groups, nations and nationalities would exercise a measure of self-government in their own respective regions. The centralizing agenda, the assimilationist agenda that we thought was buried in 1991 was rearing its ugly head throughout. And of course, when Abiy came to power, his vision was the manifestation of the continuation of the assimilationist agenda that had for long been source of the problem of Ethiopian unity and diversity. Having said that, when we decided to pull out of Abiy's prosperity agenda, it was clear we had differences on the issue of diversity, management of diversity. We had issues on the issue of federalism. We had issues on the issue of how to accommodate differences, both political, religious, ethnic, and whatnot. But Abiy thought his centralizing vision, his assimilationist vision was likely to be checkmated by the people of Tigray and the TPLF government. So the demonization campaign of the TPLF began from the get-go. It's not just about TPLF. TPLF may have had its own fair share of blames for what has happened, while at the same time, it has done a tremendous job in bringing about the kind of economic development, the kind of political opening that the country saw the previous 27 years. So we, as a party, as part of the EPRDF coalition, would take blames for things that have gone wrong. That's fair enough. But the demonization campaign was not just about TPLF. It was about the people of Tigray. So everything in Ethiopia that went wrong was blamed on the Tigrayans. And this was a prelude to the kind of genocidal campaign that was unleashed about 17 months ago. So the demonization campaign was a very relentless one. All the media and other institutions were used in making sure that Tigrayans were portrayed as the boogeyman, portrayed as the troublemakers in the region, the problem children, in not just only the country, but also in the Horn of Africa. And once that was done, Abiy was working with Isaias Afwerki, who had an axe to grind with the Tigrayans, or frustrating his ambition to become a pharaoh in the Horn of Africa. So they were amassing, if you guys remember, in the run up to the end of October and the first 2 days of November, even forces from the Somali region were being transported to Tigray. In fact, they were taking up positions in southern part of Tigray, and most of the forces were operating in Welaga and other parts of Oromia, were taking up positions in around Welkait and Sagade. So it was obvious that the Eritreans were also taking up positions, and there was a clear instruction that was given to the Northern Command people to take appropriate measures against Tigray government officials, Tigray government representatives, and Tigray government security forces, including the special forces. The special forces were quite outnumbered by the Northern Command forces, but luckily for us, there were people who were reluctant to heed the instructions of Abiy Ahmed. So the conflict began because we had prior information that something was being done by Abiy and his loyal generals and colonels in the Northern Command. We worked with people within the Northern Command who were not willing to heed Abiy's instructions. That's what happened in November 3. But the war had already begun, and the opening salvo was simply part of the game plan by Abiy Ahmed. So to say that that particular incident that night was the cause of the conflict is absolutely to miss the point. So it was a question of whether, as we would probably remember, the first target for Abiy was the Somali region. Whatever differences I might have with Abdi Ille, at least he was in charge of a constitutionally constituted region.
Yes.
And to the extent that there were issues, they could have been approached in a manner that give credit to the will of the Somali people. Whatever happened there was a harbinger of worse things to come. So for Abiy, the next target was the people of Tigray, because he thought by subduing and subduing the people of Tigray into submission, he would ensure that the rest of the country would submit to him. This is pretty much what happened. But as it turned out, that's not how things have ended up.
Yeah, Mr. Getachew, as you know, the since Abiy took, the power. As you know, his administration has left no stone unturned, to quash or to crush Tigrayan dissident. Furthermore, the increasing Iranian ambition in Amhara, what we call it in Somalis, Naftanyas, and settlers, strained the relationship between the Amhara and Tigray. On top of this, Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki used, the 2019 peace deal with Ethiopia, to exact his revenge against the TPLF and conduct, political cleansing and Tigray. They are saying, it's a law enforcement, but international community, even today, for the first time, they brought some people, who were fighting in the Sudan, the Janjaweed, for the first time as a war crime. Could you please give us, the difference in your concept? I heard also this morning that you were arguing along that line that people who are doing, the human rights research or whatever, Ethiopians, the government is hiding, all the traces, all the facts. Can you tell us the difference between these two concepts, the law enforcement operation and the ethnic cleansing and genocide?
Well, it's almost Orwellian when you hear a government undertaking a law enforcement operation with the use of tanks and jets and drones and whatnot. Law enforcement operations. If they have issues against me, they would proceed against me. If they had issues against the president, they would probably proceed against the president. So as far as we're concerned, even the whole idea of law enforcement is an absolute nonsense here. But more importantly, what the Amhara expansionists were trying to do was to use the federal resources, including the federal army and the federal budget, to achieve their territorial ambitions. So they wanted to annex Walqait, Zagare, Salamt, and Raya. They couldn't do it on their own, so they joined the Abiy's bandwagon. One of the things that Abiy and the Amaras had in common was their almost visceral knee-jerk animosity towards the TPLF and the people of Tigray. And the Eritreans also joined the bandwagon. It was obvious they had an axe to grind against the TPLF, the Tigray government, and the people of Tigray. So whatever their intention behind calling it a law enforcement operation, because they thought it would be a cakewalk, that they'd just march into Marala and then capture all of us and parade us in public, and that would be it. That's what they expected. But they also knew, both the Eritreans, the Amhara expansionists, and Abiy knew. Abiy has an ambition for power. So his idea of centralizing power, first and foremost, was about dealing with potential obstacles. And Tigray stood out among those potential obstacles. But at least for the Amhara expansionists and the Eritreans, subjugating the Tigrayans, destroying Tigray infrastructure, raping Tigrayan women, unleashing the kind of relentless attack on civilians that went on for 10 months and still goes on Western Tigray until today, was part of their agenda, not only to conduct ethnic cleansing, but also to make sure that Tigray as a people would ever be able to stand up to their rights, stand up for their rights, and challenge whatever authority there is. And everything that you would find in a textbook about genocide was done in Tigray. Everything you would find in a typical genocidal campaign, you would witness it in Tigray. Every war crime imaginable did happen in Tigray. As far as law enforcement goes, well, obviously, Abiy may have declared victory prematurely, but as it turned out, the war was not over. Of course, the people of Tigray showed their historic resilience, and they were able to chase Abiy's forces and Eritrean forces from most of Tigray. And in fact, we have shown them that we cannot bow down to their pressure, no matter what. Of course, we have a lot to do. We still have to liberate every square inch of Tigray, and that we definitely will do. And of course, we have to make sure that there is some kind of political dispensation in the country that at least shows Abiy and his comrades that there is no point for them to continue to fight, because they can never ensure people's submission, not just in Tigray, but also in other parts of the country. So what happened in Tigray was genocide, pure and simple. What happened in Tigray was all kinds of war crimes, atrocity crimes. So the whole sick joke about law enforcement operation was just an Orwellian twisting of words. That's what I can say.
Okay, my other question, Mr. Getachew, is in something like one of your late, comrade who was killed. I cannot recall his name. He say, "Mabrakawi, ጦርነት ነው ያደረግነው እና you guys overrun by some unbelievable, with the resilient and capture all the land, and you're expanded to, Amhara region, to Afar region. You were close to Addis. What is the reason that you withdraw from Addis and go back to Tigray? What's the reason?
The reason we had to withdraw, there are manifold. The most important reason for us to withdraw from northern Shoa, from Debre Brahan, was because, as you'd probably imagine, the international community was worried that TPLF would once again come and take over power, grab power. We're not interested in. And of course, it was obvious. Abiy has done a very tremendous job of making sure that TPLF would be considered, or Tigray would be considered, sort of a boogeyman in many parts of the country. So we knew that we had to work with the Oromos, the Somalis, even the Amharas, and other ethnic groups who had vested interest in ensuring that the federal dispensation continued to work. But unfortunately for us, while there was diplomatic pressure, but the diplomatic pressure was not the most important one. It was obvious that with our forces advancing into Addis Ababa, just taking over Addis Ababa alone wouldn't do the trick. It was becoming increasingly obvious that without a clear political roadmap that would include all stakeholders. The major ones would include the Oromos, the Somalis, the Sidama, the Afar, and other ethnic groups, of course, who have vested interest in change. The political process that we initiated didn't sort of match the kind of military advance we're making. So it was obvious we needed to work hard on creating alliances. Although there were efforts on our part and on the part of our partners to create an alliance of federalist forces here and there. Our assessment was that by the time we arrive in Addis, we'll have taken over a country that's absolutely economically, politically bankrupt, and we were not in a position to take up the security burden. So whatever needed to be done had to be done. And third, unlike in 1991, where we were taking over Amhara territory and assigning administrators, although locally elected and all that, we're not particularly interested in administrative affairs in many parts of Afar and Amhara that we had under our control. That meant, in many cases, our supply lines were being attacked by enemy sympathizers. We didn't want to fight against the Amharas as a people. We didn't want to fight against the Afar as a people. So we decided, until such time that our political organizational works sort of match with our military advance, it would be a good idea for us to withdraw. That's pretty much what happened. But there are also diplomatic pressures. They don't want us, but I wouldn't put it as the most important consideration for us. Also, not a particularly significant, the fact that Abiy Ahmed introduced new technologies with the support of the Emirates, with the support of the Turkish and the Chinese, also had its own role, especially in attacking our supply lines. So it's a constellation of this events that resulted in our decision to withdraw back to our positions.
Okay, after almost 17 months of devastating civil war in Ethiopia, as you know, the government on the 24th March announced it called a humanitarian truce. And it seems there is a mixed signal beaming, from the ground. We are not seeing this is holding. What's the reason, do you think? Although from your side, also as a government, you accepted the ceasefire.
Yeah, the humanitarian crisis in Tigray is quite enormous. It's not just it's not a famine because people fail to produce enough to feed themselves. This is not a problem that was wrought on us by nature or anything like that. This is something that was engineered by government to starve the people of Tigray into submission, to impose a siege on the people of Tigray. So we know we need humanitarian access. And although we know that humanitarian access issues should not be tied up with political questions, we said we would be more than willing to consider humanitarian ceasefire. And that's why we reciprocated. There have been some sort of consultations that had been going on discreetly between the two sides to work towards a humanitarian cessation of hostilities. Although the declaration by Abiy's government was made unilaterally, we're not particularly worried whether this was a bilateral or a unilateral one. What mattered to us was whether such an arrangement could create an unfettered humanitarian access to our people. So far, we have reason to believe that the central government in Addis Ababa is just playing with time. Only 20 trucks have made it. We know there have been efforts. There have been a congregation of trucks around Samara. Our people need the arrival of those trucks because people are starving. So as long as it remains true to the very objective of that humanitarian truce, whatever, or cessation of hostilities as we call it, we'll stick by the cessation of hostilities agreement. But we need a level of accountability. We need unfettered access to humanitarian aid. It's not just about a few trucks here, or even 1,000 trucks here, 1,000 trucks there. The most important issue for us is an unfettered humanitarian access to the needy. Well, if that fails to happen, of course, there always is a limit to patience. And would have to find answers elsewhere than in humanitarian cessation of hostility.
Yeah, we are running out of time, but I will ask you just a few questions. There was some, report that's saying that the president of Tigray and Prime Minister Abiy, they have had a phone conversation, and also additionally, General Sarkan and also in Field Marshal Brhanu Jula, they have had also in face-to-face meeting. Can you please clarify those, those reports?
Well, look, just to give you a very short answer, there was no phone conversation between Debretsion and Abiy. That's just a fact. But we have had very discreet communications between our people, very discreet ones. So we have back channel communications here and there. So some of these communications, especially once the cessation of hostilities have happened, the commander of our forces, Tadesse, and the chief of staff of the ANDF have to maintain open communications, because if you are going to enforce a cessation of hostilities, you don't need to meet physically. You don't need to meet, but at least we have a hotline, because we have to avoid unnecessary escalation of hostilities. If you are dealing with cessation of hostilities, and the people who are in charge of the military are supposed to address whatever differences there could arise in the issue of cessation of hostilities, I think that would suffice for now.
As you know, Mr. Getachew, the war in Tigray, especially, in Ethiopia, it became internationalized these days. And also in the Horn of Africa, it has completely changed, the political equation. Can you please talk about a little bit what kind of, political alliance you have with are you working with the US or, Abu Dhabi? Because we are seeing that United Emirates were the one, who used to, giving all the drones to Abiy. But on the other hand, we are seeing these days, they were giving also some food, which is, the diametrically opposite. And also, can you also attach the question of Ukraine and just talk about in the overall, how this war it became internationalized?
Well, it has been internationalized. Even Farmajo was part of this conflict.
Yes.
He sent force. Eritreans are involved. Emirati drones were involved. Of course, Turkish drones were purchased, I guess. Mm-hmm. The Turkish sold drones to Abiy. It was internationalized in the sense that the Iranians also sold, also supported Abiy. It goes beyond that. It has become very regional, like you say. Are we working with the US? Yes, the US is trying to broker some kind of deal. It has been very consistent in its efforts to highlight the kind of egregious crimes that have been committed against the people of Tigray. It's also now in the forefront to facilitate an unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray, the people of Tigray. It's been very instrumental in this regard. It doesn't necessarily mean they always have a very clear understanding of the complexity of the problem. It doesn't necessarily mean they have been exerting maximum pressure on Abiy or on Isaias Afwerki. We understand that, but at least they have been seized with this matter for a long time now. With regard to the Emiratis, including, of course, the Turkish, they are engaging us. Our question is that they have been part of the problem by providing Abiy with the kind of arsenals he used against the people of Tigray. And it would be only fair for them to play a more constructive role rather than coddling a tyrant. That we have been consistent in getting this message across. And the fact that the Emiratis are now, I know the Turkish are also trying to do the same, are involved in the provision of humanitarian aid is a welcome news. But we need more gestures from their side. They have to realize that there is no strategic, political, or security objective they could achieve by targeting the people of Tigray. That the people of Tigray and the Tigray forces are a force for good, a force of good, and they can play a very positive role in regional security in the Horn of Africa. To the extent that they are interested in a stable Ethiopia cannot be. We cannot imagine a stable Ethiopia in a situation where the government in Arat Kilo is trying to subdue Tigray into submission, and they have to realize that it's impossible. And similarly, the Turkish are trying to play constructively. We understand, and I think it would be a good idea if that continues to be the case. We'll continue to engage anyone. We have no business making more enemies than we have already. So we have to engage all the people who can exert some kind of influence on Abiy and Isaias Afwerki to come to a roundtable discussion to resolve the complex political crisis in the country.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. My last question to you before I pass to Hafsa. My last question to you is the future of Ethiopia and also the future of Tigray. As you know, Mr. Getachew, Ethiopia, the two schools of thought that are fighting is the unitary state versus the federalists. And you grow up, I grew up in that country. We used to see, Ethiopia, we all know all that. What do you think today, all this war after it happened, that Tigray or any other nationality are heading, to some kind of, using Article 39 to secede or to live in a federal system or come up different form of, what are the options out there, do you think, not only for Tigray, for the future of Ethiopia?
Well, honestly, it's a very difficult question at this point. The future of Ethiopia has been further complicated by the stubbornness of the leadership in Addis Ababa, which, despite swearing in the name of Ethiopia, has done everything to make sure that its disintegration becomes a reality. It has invited the most sworn enemy of Ethiopia, implacable enemy of Ethiopia, the Eritrean government, to attack its own people. And honestly, much as I wish to see some kind of peaceful transition for Ethiopia, I have difficulty imagining how I can convince the people of Tigray to even consider the idea of giving Ethiopia another chance. We have to live together with the Somalis, with the Amharas, with the Oromos. Would even if we're not in the same country, we need to live together in some kind of arrangement. But I would be very foolish and naive to assume that there are easy answers for these questions. But the most important issue for us and for every nation and nationality is that the centralizing vision in Arat Kilo is not going to work, and what little chance there is for Ethiopia to survive can only come about if the nations and nationalities are given an unfettered access to their right to self-determination, including up to secession. That's what I can say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Getachew, to give us this opportunity to have with you, this interview. And I will pass to Hafsa, and then she will conclude from there after, she has some questions.
All right, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
I know
you, Mr.
the time is limited.
For joining us. I know you're very busy, and you took the time out of your evening to join this discussion. But I had two questions to conclude. The first one is, how can Somali community, whether they're in the diaspora, whether they're from countries in the Horn of Africa or the Somali region of Ethiopia, build some sort of solidarity and alliance with the marginalized and genocide impacted communities of Tigray, whether also in the diaspora or in Tigray region? And the second question is, there's a lot of discourse on the current regional president of the Somali region contributing directly to from the start to the ongoing